So I'm creating something from scratch here, which means I need some kind of understanding of what it is I actually want to make before I start trying to play around with a perspective view. I want to take the thought out of my perspective drawings and just put them down to a pure math. The way I can do that, as we've discussed in the coming weeks or the last couple, are orthographic projections. They give us a clean face translation of whatever we need to put into an isometric sketch. So I'm going to start drawing a jug. Let's see how I want my jug to look. I'm going to think about composition on my page, because for this particular activity, we want the orthographics to complement our hero view, which will in your case probably be an ISO or a perspective. So if my hero view sits somewhere around here, I want my orthographics to be around half the size or a third of the size and off to the side. Just gives hierarchy on the page. My main piece will be the biggest and it will have its own blocking. The other two will be off to the side just to complement it. Also gives me some really clean approach for how I might want to backdrop my jug. Now I don't have to include the orthographics in the piece. I can have a backdrop that either runs central or off to the side. I've got options. We'll get to them. So, time for the world's coolest jug. I'm going to approach this with Geon principles. So, this is the framing for my jug, but I want to incorporate a cylinder, a sphere, maybe some blocky shapes. So we think about what a cylinder is. It's pretty obvious what that can create in a jug. We think about some blocky shapes. Great, got something along the lines of a handle. If we think about a sphere, well, you can do anything you want with that, and in my case, I might cut it in half. So, as I apply these in, the base of my jug is going to be some form of cylinder. I might have a split down here for where I'm going to think of a base. Start to create a circle from that, or a semicircle. I have a parting line. Here's the base of my cylinder that I've created. Let's stop it short and maybe taper it a bit. So this is my front view. And I'd say from the front, I might want to have my handle on the side. And because I like things to look good, I might complement the form a bit with a change in material. So, I only really need one extra view to communicate this profile and shape. For this particular instance, because there's a fair amount of symmetry, I could probably go the top view, or I could rotate it 90 degrees to think about how the handle interacts. It's really about what I want to show off on my piece. I think I'll go the side view, so I can think about these junctions up here. So, when you do an orthographic sketch, obviously you would project out in this direction, right? I just happen to know what I'm doing, in that I have an intent. So I'm just going to think about how all this translates down here real quickly. It's your option. If you still have the trouble of translating your intended shape, go back to the basics and draft things off from their projection lines. So, got it. So I'm going to rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees, which means I'm going to have a rounded edge up here, which is this section, and my handle is going to sit central. And I might add this in, because what we couldn't see on this edge was that now I've magically changed my width profile to have something that narrows out down the bottom. So that's given me information that I can now work with for creating this shape. This is my own object, so I know what's going on inside my head. I know what I want to create. Hopefully you're either following along and you've got the same format, or you've got an object of your own and you want to recreate it, you want to play with it. So, they sit off to the side for me. It's time for me to create this. I'm going to pick an isometric view. I've created a cube. You haven't seen any cubes in my shape, but if you've taken the time to explore how isometric graph sketching and everything works, circles sit with inside cubes. At all times, you can always find a way to make a circle from a cube or a square. So in this particular circumstance, my circle is just a result of getting a square and dividing it up into its quarters. So, find my middle edges. Now I've got everything necessary for a circle. I've just projected it on that 30-degree basis with an isometric composers. I can project down. And think about how the back edge of this isometric cube that I've created needs to maintain the same sense of parallel, meet at the same points. Then I can apply that exact same rule at the bottom. Already found our edge points. Half a circle. I can build from here. I know I have an extension. It's a slightly angled circle again. So if I just pick one high point, that is now a new projected face off of the rear of my initial cube. If I draft a line there, that's the center of my circle. That sits this far above that line, so I can draw a parallel line up there. See what I'm building on? Now at quarters. Make it eighths. I've got all the edges to do a circle on a tilt. You know, there's a parting line that matches the cylinder. You also know that I've done a parting line of material here. On a flat projection, it's a direct diagonal line. Now we have to think about how that curves around something. So if it starts right back at the edge of my profile here, and it finishes, if this is the front central face, and that's the side, I want it to finish right down, let's say at the quarter mark. That's my joining line. Now I've just got to think about my last shape apart from the handle. That is the semicircle that sits down the bottom. We can project directly down, create a whole new base for a smaller circle. We have a parting line, so I've got to mimic my cylinder. Then I can just simply join up. The outer edge of my very bottom small circle that is the base of my semicircle, and the top edge of the cylinder that dictated its max diameter. So there's a circle. I've mimicked it for the original cylinder. Here's a smaller circle that established the bottom edge of the semicircle shape I was creating. So we've got a semicircle, we've got this angled circle, we've got the base cylinder shape, and I've created this parting line, which if I really wanted to think about the dynamics of it, would have a back edge parting line that would go somewhere around there in the back that you wouldn't see. Time for a handle. We know that our handle's position is directly opposite the high point of that tilted circle I created. So if this line through here is the middle of our isometric view, this is the front plane that our handle is going to sit along. So I can project off there. matching the parallel lines I created from my isometric view, and go down. I can think about how that width spanned that I created over here. I know that that spans the full width out to the sides of my sphere. How do I want to create that junction? I know that there's a width to it that's fairly predefined. It's about 1/3 of my shape, so I can think about if this distance here is the full width of my cylinder. I can mark that out as 1/3, projected on the isometric plane, and I've now got the width I want for my handle. And I just think about final touches. I know that curves. I know that curves. Down the bottom, we've got a junction down to the step, so I've got to stop short here, do an angled shape there. Bit of a mess at the moment, isn't it? Because I've only got one lightweight line weight on the page. I mean, I've played around with the thickness of my pencil. There's a whole lot going on here that's essential for us to understand on the structure that takes away from the final shape that we're creating. So this is where line weight becomes essential. I'm going to start with my fine liner, do all my internal edges that I find important to me. I'm just going to start from front and work to back. Let's give a little spout too, eh? Makes more sense. And we can just establish the outer edges of our shape that we will then go out over with a much darker pen. So, I'm going to add some detail lines where I'm thinking about material thickness. And I'll leave it here. Here's my bespoke, one-of-a-kind water jug. Time to render it. If I want to quickly think about values, we've got a dark point right down in the bottom of our jug, which would be the darkest fill. That would get lighter out here. If we think about a light source, what complements the piece? Because I'm thinking about page composition now. Where would I like my shadow to sit? I've created some free space down here. I don't want to have something that takes away from the central focus. So I might just want my light to project directly down or from behind and create a spanning circle on the same axis line. Now we've got a shadow, more or less sits underneath our piece from a central light source that sits slightly above and behind it. Wish we put some material on. What material would you like in there?
I don't know.
Okay.
Ceramic?
It's taken from a functional perspective. I'm an industrial designer. Typically where you want water interaction, you might want something that's a bit more sterile, so let's make it metal. So the base of our jug is going to be metal. If I think about how that shades out, it's this internal region here. I've left this region as a material change, so I might make that plastic, and that would extend up into this shape too. So this is the region that I want to make look metal. If we translate that to the front view, we've got an edge line that wrapped around. So I just want in here to also look like metal. Maybe I want I don't want the handle to either. Just that section. So now I can think about where my light sources are, where the darkest edge of this metal would be. I've got a light source that sits directly behind and casts down. So technically, right in the center will be my darkest region as light warps around my curved surface. So I'm going to project my dark faces in here. We know that we have an obstruction from the handle I've created. There's going to be darkness under there where light hasn't traveled. And as we wrap around the piece, less and less coverage of marker. And if we think about the internal face where light is essentially being, it's not hitting, and we start to cast shadow, we can start to fill up the values, or we'll be throwing in some dark stuff. Still thinking about a metal finish, we still want cast line. Let that sit for a bit, and as we know now, with establishing a chrome, we need to get darker. We've already established dark regions. Let's go over them. Back and forth, play with your C3, your C5, your C7 if necessary. Start to create a chrome finish that you've now had a few chances to practice. All right, I have a rather shabby metal finish. Let's think about a plastic interaction. I know I want my handle and that feature line that I created on the base body to be plastic. Maybe I want the actual base too as well.
Can use the red one.
You want to use the red? Under pressure. Do you have a red